We have a very exciting guest for our podcast today. We have Mark Childs. You're based in Bournemouth, Mark. Do you want to give us a bit of an introduction to who you are and what you do?
Yes, thanks, Daniel. And thanks for having me on as well, Jeb and Daniel. So, like you said, I'm Mark. I'm from Bournemouth, and I own a sports performance and a small group personal training facility down here. I'm a strength and conditioning coach and personal trainer by trade, and I'll work with youth athletes, elite level athletes, also just the general population within our personal training services. And yeah, I guess it's gone from coach then into facility owner, and I've obviously connected with Daniel and Jem, and we're now we've done a few retreats together, and really excited for the discussion here today.
A great introduction with one major gap. What have you left out in your introduction? Like one of the most important parts.
Remind me, Daniel, go on.
Well, you were a professional sports person.
I actually did forget that. Yeah, I can't forget that either. That's a big part, I guess, of my identity and kind of why I've gone into what I'm doing now. So yeah, I was an ex-professional goalkeeper and grew up through the academy setups here in England. So through local clubs, Bournemouth, Southampton, had the highs and lows of that as well. The injuries that come along with it, and yeah, I feel like it put me in good stead to like the next part of my career now. And I hung my gloves up, hung my boots up at, I believe I was 24 years old. So very young, maybe time to potentially go back in the future, who knows? But yeah, my background was, of course, all sport and, the dream of being a professional athlete.
Decent skills as well for a goalkeeper. We had a couple of five-a-sides over in Portugal and not bad. Good at holding off.
Use my strengths well now, yeah.
Big time. So, Gemma, you're going to give a little bit more context about our conversation today. But before you do, as Mark has said, we have been aligned for quite a number of years now. Mark has facilitated the training at all of our sessions. And the biggest thing that Mark establishes very quickly with clients and our clients are in any environment is that sense of trust. And that's so important because athletes at different levels, different capabilities, they want to feel assured. And I think the big thing that I want to get out of this conversation is a little bit more education around, regardless of where somebody is, how that they can structure what they're doing effectively as possibly to get as much out of it as they can. And we are going to talk about recovery. Do you want to give us a little bit more depth to that, Gemma, and then lead the conversation off?
Yeah, I'm really excited about this conversation because it's something that myself and Mark talk about all the time, and you've helped me massively, even as an athlete in programming, and helped me understand the way the training should be structured and how to phase it appropriately, and just getting a good awareness of how you would manage the difference between in season and off season, and actually having an opportunity to grow and progress in the right way. And then our conversations always come up around how somebody might just be having that missing link and not actually getting the best out of their training. And that's where we cannot, I suppose, support each other in that. What will be, I think, really valuable to hear from you is from all the athletes that you work with and the people that are involved in sport, what are some of the ways that are the areas that you see that somebody might just be missing in order to get the best from their training? If they're putting in the work in the gym, what are some of the ways that they might be just kind of missing out on?
There's plenty of different ways we can kind of discuss with the gym side of things, but I also think having your system around your programming and your training load and different phases of the season is obviously important. But I also think having, systemizing, I know we've spoke about this with both you guys before, around systemizing your nutrition, around the amount of load as well. Like the nutrition's a huge part of it, even your recovery, and that will change in season, out of season, whether you are that can change around rehab as well if you picked up a knock throughout the year. So there's definitely loads of different kind of areas that we can touch on. But I guess, should we start with potentially just kind of in season and out of season, and then we can go from there?
Phase in training, I think, would be a huge place to start.
Yeah, perfect. So in terms of, let's start with an off season. So, this can, with your training, obviously you'd want to have a rest after the end of the season. If you've had a full competitive season, played lots of games, I recommend all of the athletes that I work with take a couple of weeks off, and that week off is completely switching off from a mental, emotional, and pretty much a physical point of view. If they want to play golf, if they want to cycle, if they want to swim, that's absolutely fine. But also that's their opportunity to switch off for a couple of weeks of that year, and looking at it, playing kind of like the long-term game and thinking that is your 2-week period to rest, then you're back into a nice long season ahead as well. So during the off season, generally from a training point of view, we'd introduce them after a rest into a preparation phase. So basically just laying the foundations for everything to then go on top of that. And we want to build capacity in the body. That can potentially be aerobic work as well, so lower intensity cardio stuff. So you would start with lower intensity work, getting the body back used to loading during that off-season period when you have just had your break. And then after that period, maybe a couple of weeks, 2-3 weeks, it's then a really good opportunity to kind of fill the gaps in some weaker areas. So building up your strength, because there's not much competition during that period. So it's a really good time to drive strength adaptations, potentially put a little bit more load on the body as well during that off-season period to prepare you for that pre-season period coming up. And then in terms of recovering around that period, so you've got your training side of things, you also then need to think about the recovery methods that you're going to use. And generally with the athletes that I'll have, I'll try to keep them away from ice baths during that off-season period, because we want to get the adaptations of the work we're doing. We want the body to adapt and recover to the stimulus that's on it. So that will kind of change as we go in season. But during that off-season period, from a recovery point of view, managing their training load and ensuring they have rest days in there, obviously sufficient nutrition supporting the training load that they're doing. When they have their rest, they're off. But we kind of want to have the DOMs, a little bit of the soreness during that period of the year, so that they adapt to that training stimulus that we've put on them. So that would change in season, which I'll touch on a little bit later. But I don't know whether you guys, around that from a nutrition perspective, how you guys kind of adjust nutrition for athletes during that period as well. I'm sure it's kind of aligned in some way.
I think it'd be really helpful to give a bit of context around what this means practically for people. So we're going to have lots of athletes who are in the preseason phase. It's February. There'll be a lot of athletes will have work done since January. They will be increasing that capacity. They will be probably running twice a week. They'll be in the gym 3 times a week right now. Give us a sense of what a week would look like for we say team sport athlete, Gemma. How you would structure a week for a team sport athlete at the latter stages of our beginning of preseason. So that's probably where we're at right now. We're probably most elite athletes, even if they're a club or county. This could be context for soccer or rugby or any sport. But I think having a sense of what that could look like would be very helpful.
Yeah, perfect. So in terms of, obviously it does come down to that individual and the time they have available. So if they're a full-time professional athlete and they don't have another job that they're then balancing as well, that allows them more time. But generally kind of like a high-low model and looking at your week from a 7-day view, that can work. So it may be Monday, it potentially might be a gym-based training session. And then it could be Tuesday, they have a high day, which may be some cardiovascular work and some gym work. That would essentially, I like to color code them. So green would be a low day, a moderate day would be amber or orange, and then a high day would be red. So potentially we would start with an amber day on the Monday, a red day on the Tuesday, which would be a double training day. And then they would potentially then have that green day on the Wednesday, where that is then just recovery, focusing on resting, allowing the body to recover and adapt to the load you've put on it. And then I would then build that back up towards the end of the week, which might potentially look like it could be an amber day on the Thursday, so a single training session on the Thursday, single training session on the Friday, double training day on the Saturday, and then another green low recovery day on the Sunday. So that's kind of a nice way to color code it and make it nice and simple for the athlete to see the intensity and the load on those days. And I like using that as well because it visually gives them something to look at where they can see kind of a spike in intensity and colors and then a drop and then back up again. And then in terms of actually progressing that over time, you then have the overload during those training sessions, and obviously what you're doing within those sessions as well. But as an overall view of the week, that's kind of an example you could use.
And without getting into too much detail, just give us a guide for session length. So what represents red, if you know what I mean, how long sessions would be, and just rough rep ranges, because I think this is all very relevant. Because these are the types of conversations that we would be having with a lot of athletes, and then we would be understanding what phase they're at, and then, like you said, we're having that lifestyle conversation with them.
Yeah, perfect. So for a red day example, this would be things such as quite long duration, high intensity cardiovascular work, sprinting, heavy strength training. So that's quite taxing on the body there. So this is where, in terms of intensity, will be high on those days, but it might not necessarily mean it's going to be super long 2-hour gym sessions or super long 2-hour pitch-based sessions. You could do your strength work in the gym at 4 sets of 4 reps, for example, and doing heavy strength work where you'd want big recovery periods in between, but that is going to be quite taxing on your body there. So that is an example of kind of the rep ranges around your main strength lifts that you might be doing on your gym days, on your red days. And then in terms of the pitches as well, that might then be some more high intensity runs, building up your anaerobic energy system and stuff like that. But that's doubled in onto one day. So it might be high speed running around 80-85% of your max speed. Again, I want to try and make this as simple as possible. So if people don't have GPS data and stuff like that, that they can kind of, relate to it or use it themselves. So it might be a sprint session in the morning, and then they go and do their strength work in the afternoon, for example. You won't need much sprint work. It might be 3 sets of 30-meter top speed sprints with 5-minute recoveries, which doesn't seem like much, but that is going to be a lot of load for your hamstrings and also on the body. And then, of course, following that, doing your strength work in the afternoon, that's going to be another high intensity day, which then you have to have that recovery period in afterwards. So hopefully that gives a little bit of context behind what a red day might look like, and kind of the intensities involved and what sort of exercises are classed as high intensity, I guess.
And when you're structuring a week like that, when someone's coming into the preseason where the main focus is on adaptations, like actually trying to progress, sometimes, I certainly did, I suppose later on, was actually realize that how important it is to get this right, to be able to manage recovery so that you can get into a session and actually be able to produce the right intensity in order to create that adaptation. How would you help somebody who's maybe gone from just training as hard as possible to now realizing that I actually have to structure my week in a certain way to get the best out of those sessions?
I think a lot of it is allowing the athlete to actually understand why those low days are in there. So from my point of view, working with them, I'll work individually with a lot of athletes. So it might be different to, people working in team sport. But my job essentially is to prepare that athlete for preseason. The most important thing is the sport. But if I can educate that athlete on, right, we're going to go hard on these days. This is a red day. And this is why we're having that recovery day in there. I've had it before where I've been working with elite athletes and they've said, can we do more on this day? Can we add an extra session in on here? And I would tell them, you're going to feel this tomorrow. But that responsibility of, and having that plan and that program in place. It's there for a reason. And then I'd check in with them the next day and they're feeling it. But that's why they have a planned recovery day in there to recover from that. So I guess in how to prepare someone for it, that off-season period that a lot of athletes in Ireland may be in at the moment is the perfect opportunity to kind of find out what works for them as well, what makes them feel good on their recovery days. And also just understanding kind of what I mentioned earlier, that it is about the bigger picture. It's about the whole season and what makes a successful upcoming season look like. So you're laying the foundations now. You're finding out what works for you, what makes you feel good on your rest days, what allows you to switch off. And you can then take that into preseason when that comes. So yeah, I guess it does come down to that program and that actual plan, not just kind of winging it each week. And it's really easy for you as an individual in the off season to have a plan, because you're not going to go into your sport and then everything's changed on that morning because the facilities aren't available or something. So a lot of things change in sport week by week. So I think the opportunity as an individual to learn what works for you and to practice this structure is this off-season period now. Then you can take that and apply that into your weeks when you go back into pre-season.
I think that plan and actually being able to see where you are in the phase is one of the most helpful ways to structure your training, so that you can see, like, I'm here and I know that I've got this length of time to work on these specific things. And when I get to the point of I'm going into the season, you have so much trust in the work that you've done, because you've clearly outlined when it starts, when it ends, and what the next phase is going to look like, that you can actually build on something. But it's also depending on how you've been driven previously. You have all of these beliefs that you have to just work as hard as possible, and it's hard to buy into something like that. But I think with what you do and the way that you lay it out helps someone somewhat recognize where they are and just actually have that plan in place. But the dialogue around it is where it really comes to life, because you can get to know and understand a person and why they might want to throw in an extra session or why they might be feeling that way. It can sometimes just be lack of education or understanding where they are and what needs to happen in this current phase.
Mark, you've dealt with lots of challenging personalities, I have no doubt.
Yeah. Everyone's different. So
Yeah.
part of it though, yeah.
Yeah, not talking about anyone in particular.
I'm Mark's starship.
I'm glad you're laughing. That's a good start. What are some of the ways, like Gemma is pointing to things that are very obvious as you say them? You know, you talk about where you are in the plan, and you've touched on athletes, you know, that kind of feedback where you go, you will be sore tomorrow. But how do you deal with the resistance? What are the kind of ways that you approach this? Because like we see this all the time, and that's why Gemma is focusing on it. And we don't just see it from an athlete perspective. We also see it in corporate performance, and we see it a lot in endurance, where, I mean, you look at the structure and there's really, it's just about doing more and more and more. So how do you go about that, where you're bringing in, you know, dealing with the personality that does want to do more too?
Yes, it comes up a lot. And now you've brought it up, I've thought of hundreds of scenarios, and how, again, it comes from an open conversation, you know, good relationship with the athlete as well, and putting the athlete first and that person, because they are all different. But a very common trend, which I'm sure you guys have seen as well, is like what you just said there, like doing more. Everyone has to be busy, and if they're not doing something, then they feel like they're taking a step backwards, or they've lost their edge, or something like that. So what I tend to do in that situation there is have a conversation with the athletes, and they'll have something in their plan, but it's completely away from their sport. It's low intensity. It might be a new skill or something like that. That will be part of their recovery plan to take that time away. So it could be that they still go into the gym. They do their specific mobility work. So they still have a session on their plan to go and do. But it's incredibly low load. It's going to help address potentially, like I mentioned there, any flexibility, any mobility point of view. It might be some low intensity cardio to increase the blood flow. And it could potentially be a 15, 20-minute sauna to help increase blood flow as well. But that is still a day in their plan, which has filled an empty box, which athletes may perceive as, I can't have that. Like, I need to do something today. And sometimes, athletes will go and do their own thing. They are their own human being as well. And they might just go and do an extra session on that day and then be feeling it come the weekend, or they don't feel so fresh in their next gym session that they do. And, it's kind of a trial and error. The plan is in place for a reason, but I find what I've found has worked best is a conversation with that athlete on what they want to do on their rest day. And then I can build them a low intensity kind of task to do, or plan or session to do, that still ticks that mental box of I've gone and done something today. That's what I find personally works best with them. But what that looks like is completely different to the individual that I work with.
Have you any examples of where maybe there is a plan in place and there's questions around how much they might be progressing? There's the expectation of, if this is the plan, what the outcome should be, and maybe someone not following it, maybe whether it's the right intensity or they're doing too much and not recovering appropriately, where they're not maybe getting the adaptations that should technically on paper be the outcome.
Yeah, so should we look at this from an off-season perspective?
Maybe pre-season, like where we're at now with the Irish population, and if somebody's putting in the work, they've got a plan in place, but what would be the kind of trade-offs, or if it's not going to plan, or maybe they're not following it as it has been laid out and structured?
Yeah, it's of course, because in the off-season, pre-season time, they'll be back in team sport playing. So in terms of how they know they're making progress, that would then be some outcome measures. So what are the key things that with your plan that you're looking to improve during this phase of off-season to pre-season, or pre-season to the start of the season? And what are those areas you're looking to work on? So that would be like testing, for example, whether that's an energy system test, aerobically, anaerobically, strength tests, maybe around particular areas that you might have previous injuries on, those there, and then having planned retesting times and allowing enough time to stick to the plan, to drive the adaptation and to get the adaptation is important. So yeah, having the key outcomes of what you want out of that plan from the start of your testing to then retesting. And then obviously just tracking that plan and monitoring that throughout as well. And generally, how do you feel during your sessions? Like, are your runs getting easier? Are you getting stronger in the gym? And how you track your progress that way is also feedback that you can take that you're heading in the right direction. Of course, that's someone that doesn't have access to a coach in person testing them and stuff like that. But yeah, I guess it just comes to having actually an outcome and what you want out of that specific training phase you're in, and then testing to see, if you've reached that outcome. Does that kind of answer that one there?
Yes, so somebody would have they'd have their baseline measures and maybe something around strength in different areas, their aerobic capacity, and maybe a speed measure. And if they're working on that, they're following the plan, when would they look to maybe retest or expect to have another test to see how they're progressing? Is it waiting to the very end, or would you have something in between that?
I think you'd be able to measure that. So for example, we could use you as an example there. Gemma, you may have some speed work within your program if that's something we wanted to look to improve. And you might use your GPS monitor to track that. You might just be doing a speed session on week 4 of that program and bang, you've hit a new PB. And that might just come during the training period there. You might hit a PB with your strength work during that training block as well. But I think definitely, having that testing at the back end of it and allowing enough time to get the adaptation you want. Like, you can pick that up whilst you're doing the actual training program. But say if it was 6 or 12 weeks down the line where your retesting was, you might have even PB'd before you even got to that, in terms of actually seeing if you're improving and stuff. So does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, that definitely does. Yeah, I think that'll be helpful just to know what to expect and setting the baseline and having a time period to work on to retest again.
Yeah, and I think one of the mistakes people make there, just to touch on that lastly, is don't change your program so much. Trust it and stick to it. If you change it every 2 weeks, like you're going to be chasing too many things and you're not actually going to get to the outcome that you want. So you have to stick to that plan and trust that plan. And, you know, if you have a coach with that, they'll be monitoring everything and adjustments can be made at any point. So that's where the good communication with your coach and the client works really well. But yeah, you have to stick to that program to actually get the outcome at the end of it. And 9 times out of 10, if you're accountable to that and you do it and you communicate well and the feedback's there, then you get the outcomes that you're after.
That actually was going to be my next question, because there's 2 parts to this, and it's going to be a very open-ended. It's more of a kind of touching on the topic rather than and to see where you take it rather than being too specific. So the first part of it is to give people a little bit of context in how to set targets. I think that's useful. You know, if we're talking about a push-pull, you know, let's keep it simple from a strength perspective. Again, these are the types of things, depending on the athlete, the sport, that we're starting to have more and more conversations around. But the second part is the impact of environment and the impact of maybe your own internal beliefs versus what's actually possible based off well-structured training. So where I'm coming from with this, and we all have these kind of personal bias. I come from a background of I'm actually qualified as a personal trainer and qualified from a strength and conditioning perspective. And I've been doing strength training in different contexts since I was 18. And it was something I was always really interested in. I had a ceiling in my head, you know, based on my body weight and based on what was possible. And I actually feel a little bit embarrassed to say that for the first time, like this last year, I just went repeatedly after the same types of exercise. So I didn't change my program. I just stuck to it. And I actually don't know where the ceiling is now, because it's just progressively, because I've stuck at it, it's gone up and up and up and up. So you see why I'm leaving it quite open. Like there is an environmental element, you know, the people around you, what your reference points are. Then there's the scientific references, and then there's the kind of internal, what you believe is possible, which all kind of mix in to what people are capable of doing.
Yeah, as you know, you kind of used the perfect example there, kind of what I've just mentioned around you can monitor and see your progress over time just by following a program. You know you're getting stronger because now the weight you've done for the last couple of weeks is easy. You've now overloaded that, continued that progress as well. And I think that part of it is what opens people's minds on what is possible and getting to those new levels and trusting, and you then have trust in that plan and in that program. And, you know, it's an accomplishment when you start to hit those new targets that you've never done before, then it raises the ceiling, like you said there. In terms of the ceiling and where you can take that, I think that just comes off following that plan and structuring that plan. And it's all part of actually doing the work. Go back onto what you mentioned in there, Daniel. Just remind me on where you said around the scientific side of it, and then also like your inner belief and stuff like that.
Yeah, so I left that purposely open rather than giving you 2 very specific questions. But I suppose the first point is scientifically, like from an athlete perspective, you know, we're after 1.5 or we're after 2 times body weight, and you know, as gold standard, and having those reference points are great. But then there's the other part where there's a psychology around it, and there's a coaching where, you know, you're saying to an athlete, you're actually capable of so much more. And there's the coaching component in this. So here's the criteria. And these are like, there's the plan, there's the targets, there's where you sit in it. And then sometimes it takes months and sometimes it takes years to achieve what you're capable of. But you can't have one without the other, and then there's the person and their belief system around it. And like, you can see how I'm so fascinated by the psychology of it, because so much of it comes back to, if you are trying to maximize intensity all the time, you'll break. If you're not applying enough intensity, you're not going to progress. If you're not consistent and patient enough with your program, you're not going to actually recognize what's possible over time. And I think whether it be physical changes or behavioral changes, the world is just so skewed in expectation about what's possible, because we are, in a lot of cases, we are talking about phases of development are in multiple weeks. And sometimes it can take an athlete, we work with a lot of developing athletes, it can take them 3 years to get to where they're getting to in terms of elite level of physical capability.
Yeah, I think you mentioning years is good, because it does take that long. And it's a process that the athlete learns about himself on that journey as well, with the setbacks that come along with that. You'll prioritize different things more, maybe off the back of a setback. And that will stick with athletes throughout their careers. I definitely had that when I had my injury, when I played. When I had my setback, I had a knee dislocation. Like, that gave me that experience that I went through there. I learned a lot about myself through that period. And then I value the stuff I wasn't doing so much more since then. And we work with, a lot of athletes over here, and they're in exactly the same boat as that. But it does take years with that. It takes actually doing the work and going through the process of it all to see what's possible, like we just mentioned there. And yeah, I think it applies in all areas, from the training point of view, from the performance point of view, and the skill element as well. The nutrition practice, the recovery practice, that all takes years. And everyone's different with that, and they find out what works for them and stuff like that. But you can't work that out, I don't think, until you've gone in, you've done that work, you've got the experiences, the good, the bad, the ugly along the way. And I would say it is years in the making. And your experiences, good and bad, through your sport, through injury, that builds up kind of that personality, the mindset, the resilience, and the accountability, I guess, to then, sticking to your program and progressing and believing what is possible, especially when you have those hard times during your careers as well.
I think we overestimate what we can do in the short term, but significantly underestimate what we can do in years, in the long term.
I want to touch on something very briefly before we finish, because it was a huge part of the work that I did in both in Leinster and Dublin. We were, and it's just to give that sense of clarity again around phase development. So we would have always talked to athletes about where they are now and where they are in 1, 2, or 3 years. So you only have in a team sport, you only have very specific phases of development. And we would have seen a relationship between an athlete who missed phases of development and lacking, not hitting targets from a strength perspective, or increased risk of injury. So you say years, but if you look at the cycles, there's maybe 3 per year. In some cases, there's only 1 per year phases of development, where you can layer upon layer upon layer, because throughout the entire rest of the season, you're just looking to maintain. You're not going to be really developing higher levels of strength and muscle. So I think it's so important, particularly for athletes in that early phases or stages of their career, to recognize, while it's years, each phase is so important. And like, if you've missed one.
Yeah, exactly that. And I'm a huge advocate of James Clear's work, the 1% every day and stuff like that. I love all of that. And it really is those days that count, but that stacks up over the years, and that's what builds the resilience with everything. So in terms of, like I said at the start, even in the off-season period and the pre-season period, it all goes full circle. You're laying those foundations for that year, and then you're going through those phases. We're quite lucky here. We get to measure and track the athletes across the year, and you can see the progress they've made. Whether it's every time you then test throughout say three testing periods throughout the season, and you see them progressively getting better each year, that spanned across your whole career is 10%, 20%, 30% better. And it comes from that structure of the foundations, the pre-season, maintaining from like a strength and a gym perspective during the season, making sure you're available. That's the most important thing. That allows you to be good at your sport, allows you to actually do the fun part of it as well. You know, not every athlete enjoys the gym side of it, but it's part of it. You've got to look after yourself, and that allows you to then perform at your best and, you know, make a career out of your sport long term. So it is in small little blocks, but it's just that power of consistency, I guess, and that then does add up over years. And I think, you know, those that get to have extremely long playing careers are the guys that consistently do everything very good every single day, no matter how they feel.
Mark, thank you very, very much. We are going to get you back on if you're open to it, and we maybe focus on how to sharpen the axe in season and some of the other conversations. But I think this has been really valuable, really great for us to go over and to have your expertise and insights. And then we'll hear a little bit more about some of the challenging work that you've had to do with Gemma as well another time. So thank you very much.
No, thank you so much for having me on. And yeah, great conversations. I mean, we could dive in on all of these bits even more. So yeah, we'd love to jump on and chat further, but thank you.
Thanks a million, Mark.